Number 8, Simon Power.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Justice and asks, has she asked the Prime Minister why there were no new justice policies mentioned in the Prime Minister's statement that, quote, in the next few weeks I will be announcing significant new policies in critical areas such as health, education and housing, end quote, and if not, why not?
The Honourable Annette King.
Madam Speaker, no, because unlike National, which has an inner clique that decides policy and only feeds their backbench manure, Labor has a proper policy process which involves all members of Parliament, and I point out to the member the Prime Minister said such as is in her statement. It wasn't exclusive to just those 3 areas.
Supplementary question, Simon Power.
Question.
Order. Simon Power.
Why doesn't that member have Labor on his billboards? Oh, do you? No one can see it. No one can see it. Supplementary question. Supplementary question. To the Minister of Justice. To the Minister of Justice, why has the Corrections Minister proposed looking at banning gangs when she has told this House 3 times she did not believe it was feasible or possible to outlaw them, and when Labor did nothing for gangs about 2 years, then left a bill that increases penalties for gang members in the drawer for a year after it was approved by Cabinet because the then Minister was too busy with the Electoral Finance Act?
The Honourable Annette King.
Madam Speaker, the Minister of Police would be silly not to consider looking at legislation in another country if it works, and what the Minister of Correction has said is we ought to look to see if it works, and I totally agree with him. But I don't agree with the members saying that this government has done nothing around gangs. We have done a lot around organised crime. What the member won't recognise is what we have done because it doesn't suit his purposes.
Supplementary question, Simon Power.
To the Minister, can she confirm that there are no new justice policies because the government still hasn't passed laws it announced much earlier, like the Criminal Proceeds Bill promised at the last election, the Corrections Amendment Bill first announced in June last year, and the Legal Services Amendment Bill she told the Sensible Sentencing Trust Conference would be introduced in May and passed soon after, but has still yet to receive its first reading?
The Honourable Annette King.
Speaker, I can assure the member there will be a very strong justice policy from the Labor Party, as we have had in every election. I wonder how many members of the National Party know anything about their justice policy, because I'm pretty sure they won't have been told it yet.
Supplementary question, Simon Power.
To the Minister, can she confirm that neither the new legislation to govern electronic bail that the Prime Minister announced in June or the amendment to the Domestic Violence Act that the Minister said would be introduced by July have yet to appear before the House at all? And in light of the 43% increase in violence under her government, why have improvements to laws dealing with family violence laws been put on the back burner?
Now, the Honourable Annette King.
Can I assure the member they certainly haven't been put on the back burner? We undertook a major review of the Domestic Violence Act. We've consulted widely. The legislation has recently gone through Cabinet. It will be in this House in due course, and I will look forward to the National Party voting for it. You see, it's very easy to sit there and shout and interject. When they were in government, their record on law and order was abysmal. It was abysmal. Whether it was organised crime, domestic violence, and you know what really disappoints me? That even today they still do not recognise family violence as a major issue.
Supplementary question, Simon Power.
To the Minister, does in due course mean that those bills I have referred to, will they be in the urgency motion this week?
The Honourable Annette King.
Speaker, I say to the member he'll have to wait and see.
Supplementary question, Simon Power.
To the Minister, can she confirm that the Prime Minister's announcement at the beginning of the year that Labor would investigate a victims' compensation scheme rests on the advice of the Law Commission, which isn't due to produce a discussion document until this month? And why hasn't the policy firmed up in the 14 years since her leader last announced it in 1994?
The Honourable Annette King.
Speaker, the member is not correct in his comments about the Prime Minister. What the Prime Minister ensured was there was the passage of a Victims' Right Act in 2002. They had 9 years to put in place legislation for victims in New Zealand. No legislation from the National Party. Not only did we put in place the legislation, but this week we announced the Victims' Charter, and we also announced the 0800 number so victims can get information when they need it. We have put money and commitment behind victims. They've only ever talked about it.
Supplementary question.
Supplementary.
Ron Mark. Order. Ron Mark.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the Minister, would it be helpful, given that on the 14th of March 2006 the government was dismissive of New Zealand First's calls to pass legislation to outlaw gangs, and on the 21st of November 2007 the government dismissed New Zealand First's request that they look at the South Australian Serious and Organised Crime Control Act that was being put in through the Parliament that day, would it be helpful if New Zealand First tabled, for its first reading, the Anti-Gang and Organised Crime Bill it has drafted, which blends the strengths of the Australian Act with the Suppression of Terrorism Act here in New Zealand and the US Congress's Racketeering, Influenced and Corrupt Organisations Act? Would it be helpful if we tabled that bill now?
The Honourable Annette King.
The member has every right to table whatever he likes, and I would have no objection to him tabling whatever he wanted to. However, what we have said is that we want to look at the South Australian legislation, because the last thing we want to do is to put in place something that doesn't work. But we've got the opportunity, because we work closely with South Australia, to be able to look at how their legislation works and then see if it can be applied to New Zealand.
A point of order, Ron Mark.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I seek leave for the Anti-Gang and Organised Crime Bill to be introduced and set down for first reading as a member's order of the day, despite Standing Orders 2761 and 2771.
Leave as sought. Is there any objection? Yes, there is objection.